Hello again. In this video, we're going to discuss the English rat defense, which arises after the moves d4, d6, c4, e5. So uh, there is another move order, for example, c4, d6, d4, e5. It's the same thing. And okay, after c4, white wants to just go knight c3, e4, and so on, and it allows us to go for e5. We are happy to get e5 on the board. Whenever it's possible, we go for this. And here, okay, white has some options. Knight c3 is one move. D takes e5 has to be considered as well. e3 makes sense. d5 to just grab more space. e4 and finally knight f3, which is the main move. Okay, let's see them one by one. First of all, knight c3. This move used to be popular back in the days, but afterwards it turned out that black gets a good play here if he knows what he's doing. The idea of the move is to go for quick development. And here of course, we just take on d4. This is the drawback of the move knight c3. We take on d4 and white is forced to take with the queen. Queen takes d4, and now we gain a tempo on the queen with knight c6. As we've seen also in other lines in this course, whenever we can go for this, we do it. And here we'll consider queen d1. It's a bit strange to go to the initial square, queen d2, and even queen d3. Queen d1, well, white just goes back, and with this move, he wants to be able to develop the bishop on the c1, h6 diagonal, maybe to f4 or g5. And here it's good to fianchetto the bishop with g6. Our bishop will do a good job on the long diagonal. Here we're going to see knight f3, which is the most played move, and also e4. First of all, let's start with e4. And with this move, white is seizing some space, but d4 square will be weak. We just continue with bishop g7, and it may sound risky, but in some situations we even have the idea to take on c3 and completely destroy white's structure and then play against those pawns. So here we're going to see bishop d3, which is the natural move, and bishop e3. Bishop e3 is just to show you the idea. Okay, first of all, bishop e3. I want to show you this move to show you this idea of bishop c3. Actually, with bishop e3, white wants to go queen d2, of course. And here it's possible, of course, it's possible to just go for knight f6 with a normal position. There is nothing wrong with this. But here bishop c3 is justified. And it works because we have a lead in development. We are completely destroying white's queenside structure. So b takes e3 and then knight f6, attacking on e4. And it turns out it's not easy for white to develop. And of course, there is always a bit of risk with the dark squares, but for now, we can act very quickly. And our next moves could be bishop e6, queen e7, and even knight g4 to attack the e3 bishop. Of course, all this depends on what white is doing. So bishop d3 makes sense to reinforce the e4 pawn and maybe finish the development with knight e2. Here we go, knight f6, knight e2, and castle. So far, both sides made natural developing moves. Well, white put the knight on e2 so that there were no ideas with bishop g4. It is less exposed to bishop g4. Now with bishop g4, there is f3. Okay, castle. And here we can take the light squared bishop with knight e5. Of course, there's nothing wrong with rook e8. It's very natural setup for black here. But knight e5 is more interesting, in my opinion. b5. The point is to defend the c4 pawn so that he can go bishop c2. And if we take on d3 here, it's a bit early, but we have a very nice strike. We've seen it in other positions, but it is the same move, but there were different motives behind it. However, here it goes, b5. Very strong, and this is a novelty. The point is to destroy white's pawn center, and the pawn sacrifice is only temporary. White cannot keep the pawn in good conditions. Also, I like this move because it's really spectacular, out of the blue. So here it goes. C takes b5. Of course, white has to take the pawn, and the other capture with knight b5 is bad because of knight d3, queen d3, and knight takes e4, and the rook on a1 is hanging. So here black gets material. C takes b5, of course, and now the point of our previous move is to go a6. We're trying to open up files on the queen side. And okay, here white will see b6 and bishop c2. I think b6 is the best. I just want to mention that b takes a6 fails to knight d3, queen d3, and then bishop a6. And suddenly you can see that these bishops are dominating the position. So white is better off to avoid this. Bishop c2 is an attempt to keep the pawn, but I'm not sure white should try and keep the pawn here. Because now we get some extra tempi after taking on b5, knight b5, bishop a6. So we get this with tempo, development with tempo. Also, the bishop is very active here. Now the only move is to go back, knight bc3. And here we play c6. The idea is to have d5 later on, or even rook e8 and then d5. So white needs to consider all these moves. And in the meantime, okay, he's a pawn up, a solid pawn up. But we have very active pieces, and this d5 push is very strong and quite difficult to meet here. Actually, I think The position is balanced. There is dynamic compensation here, but it's easier to play for black. Normally, in a practical game, I would go with white b6 just to stop all this playing for compensation attempts, and just to stop the counterplay and close the open files. So now we take the pawns, he takes b6, bishop g5, white is finishing the development and pinning our knight. But here we can just go bishop b7. Okay, we have a weakness to d6 pawn, but it's not easy for white to attack it. And in the meantime, we have active pieces. Just look at this knight on e5, for example, bishop on b7, and so on. Our dark square bishop is doing great on the long diagonal. And we have different ideas. For example, b5 could be a move. Rook e8, of course. Rook c8, we like to... Obviously, we like to include the rooks on the open files, even if for the moment we're not threatening anything. h6 could also be a move just to see where the bishop goes. So it's a playable position. Now let's go back. But the most played move is knight f3 here, simply developing the knight. Bishop g7, of course. And now we're going to see g3 and bishop g5. First of all, g3. This was very rarely played. The idea is to fianchetto the bishop, of course, and get some solid position, but this doesn't change our plan. We can go knight f6 and finish the development. Also, a good move here would be bishop e6 to immediately attack on c4. But let's say just normal development. We want castle, rook e8. I like it that in these situations where our opponent's play is not challenging, we can just make natural moves and get a good position. Bishop g2, castle, castle, and then rook e8. Always a good move in this position to activate the rook. And we already have this idea to jump knight e4 to trade a pair of knights and then open up the bishop. Also, a5 is another move that I like here to gain some space on the queen side, of course. And black has a comfortable position here. There is the question for white is where to develop the dark squared bishop. If he goes bishop g5, there is h6. So what to do with the bishop? If, on the other hand, if the bishop is developed on e3, then we can just take on e3, f it takes, and then knight g4 with an initiative and long-term compensation. I mean, this is a typical exchange sacrifice, and now look at the weakness on e3. And also, we have such a great bishop on g7. But more tempting here is perhaps to go bishop g5 and then to follow up with e3, bishop e2, castle, and just develop the pieces this way, not to fianchetto the bishop. Knight f6, e3, all according to the plan. And of course, here we can castle and it's fine, but I like to include h6 here just to get the extra option of g5, and now bishop h4. White is trying to create some weaknesses in our position. And here we can go g5, bishop g3, and knight d7. Of course, knight h5 is also good to just take this bishop. But knight d7 has the idea to reroute the knight to c5. And here we're hoping the bishop on g3 will stay uh, closed. I mean, as long as we have this pawn chain, we are fine. So we need to be careful that white doesn't push c5. Useful moves here, knight c5, castle, and we can even consider um, to take on c3 to destroy white's pawn structure, or even f5, but depending on what white is doing. So this was queen d1. Now let's see this queen e3. It's a check, so we need to we need to take a look at it. I don't think this is a good move, and the check can easily be parried with bishop e6, developing the pieces and going for quick development. Here, just don't go queen e7, and this would play into white's hands to trade the queens like this. So bishop e6 is the good move. We want to play for the initiative, and queen is misplaced on e3. And here, black has easy play, and already white has to solve some problems. So then queen d2 is the most natural retreat, and white has this idea to go b3, bishop b2 to fianchetto the bishop. And then, of course, it makes sense to have the queen on d2. On a long term, white is hoping to get a grip on the position. But as it turns out, black has very good resources. And actually, in this line, you're going to see one of the most exciting lines in the course. Plenty of wild positions and sacrifices. Knight f6. It's important to remember to start with this move, because if you go g6 here, after b3, white manages to get a grip. And the reason is that in some lines we need the bishop to go to b4, not to fianchetto it straight away. So knight f6 is the flexible move. And here we want to see what white will do. Our idea is to go in some lines g6, but it all depends on what white is doing. Or bishop e6, or even a5. a5, this is the way to meet b3. So these are our ideas, but for now, let's see what white can do. And there is b3, the main move, to immediately implement this idea to fianchetto the bishop. There is g3 and e4. All these moves make a lot of sense. Let's start with g3. It has a good strategical idea to fianchetto the bishop and put some pressure on our position. But here the c4 pawn could be exposed, and we already attack it. White has to do something about it, and also there is a second threat to go d5. And here we're going to see e4, which makes some sense to stop d5 and defend on c4, or knight d5. First of all, let's see e4. Apparently a good move, but you'll see this mix up of ideas. It's not good for white, and white is not able to get a grip. And here it's better to develop the bishop on e7, not on g7. One main point is that, of course, it's faster. We are already preparing to castle. And in some lines, we'll have spectacular lines, and we can need we need this bishop on the f8 h3 diagonal. And here, okay, the best move for white is knight f3. But then after castle, black just has a very nice position. It's still not clear how white will develop, and obviously it's not easy to get the grip that white was looking for. But just to show you the dangers in this position for white, for example, if b3, which is very natural move, now defending the pawn on c4, and then what white wants to go bishop g2, bishop b2, and so on. And maybe on the long term, this bishop on e7 could be even misplaced. Well, this is a mistake, actually. b3 is a mistake. And the reason for this is that we have knight e4. Very nice tactical strike. And it all works because white's king is still in the center, and this diagonal a5, e1 is weak. White has to take, and d5, this is the point, opening up the position, and there are multiple threats. Main threat is, of course, bishop b4. D takes e4 is another threat, and black is winning here. White is not able to defend against all these threats. This line just shows the dangers in white's position. And knight d5 is the better move, just to stop once and for all these ideas with d5. But usually white doesn't want to commit the knight too early to d5. But here it's necessary. Now we can just fianchetto the bishop with g6. Knight e5 is the main move. This is also fine. But to me, the g6 looks more direct. So bishop g2, bishop g7. And here knight h3 probably makes more sense. I'm going to briefly discuss knight f3 also. This is also a natural move, but now the g2 bishop is shut off, so we just castle. You notice black doesn't need to do anything special, just with very natural moves is getting fully playable position. Rook e8, let's not forget to include the rook into play. Then we want to push a5 because it's a good move to gain some space on the queen side. And white's pieces are misplaced here. The queen on d2, knight on d5. It's not exactly what white wanted to do. White still needs to find a way how to develop the c1 bishop. Knight h3. It's perhaps a more clever move to keep the bishop more g2 bishop more active. The knight can jump to f4, again reinforcing the d5 square. Okay, we just castle, and knight h4 was the idea. If castle, then just knight e5. The c4 pawn is threatened, and we also want to go c6. So again, white has to solve some problems. And this happens because white played knight e5 too early instead of developing the pieces. But let's say knight hf4. And now we can regroup with bishop d7, castle, and rook e8. And black has a good position here. I like the setup. Again, it's not easy for white to develop this bishop on c1 because the queen is on the way. This is quite an original setup with the knights on f4 and d5, but it feels to me that it's more difficult to play this position with white. In the meantime, like in the previous lines, a5 is a good move, but we can also consider knight e4 because it is with tempo and to open up the bishop and so on. So I like black's position here, although perhaps it's around equal. Let's go back. e4 is another way for white to continue. White wants to control the center with this move, not fianchettoing or losing time with the fianchetto anymore. Now c4 is also defended. And here it's good to fianchetto the bishop. Also, a5 was possible, but is not as effective as when white goes b3. But g6 makes sense, and we want to put the bishop on the long diagonal where it will be good. And here we're going to see b3 and bishop d3. Bishop d3 in case white tries to develop the king side first. And it makes sense so that he doesn't fall on tactical tricks later on. Bishop g7, knight g2. Well, the knight is better placed here because if white goes knight f3, there could be ideas of bishop g4. So white tries to avoid this, knight e2 instead. Castle, castle, and rook e8. Well, the rook is good here. We're not threatening anything yet, but just to include the rook into play. Of course, it's a matter of taste how to proceed first. Also, a6 is possible here, or even knight e5 to go after the light squared bishop. Rook e8. And now white has to find a way to develop the c1 bishop. So let's say b3. This is how he's going to do it with bishop on b2. But even in this setup, the knight on e2 doesn't look so well placed because it's not controlling the center. And here I like a6 with idea knight e5 and then to push b5. Just to mention that we shouldn't fall for this trap to win a pawn here. Knight e4 is not good. After bishop e4, rook e4, knight e4, bishop a1. It's important not to stop the calculation, not to stop the line here, because here white can go knight 4 c3, and our bishop is trapped. We'll need to give the bishop for the knight, and then white will have a lot of fun on the dark squares around the king. We only have one pawn for it, so I don't think it's enough. We just need to stay away from this line. I mean, we have move like a6, bishop b2, and now knight e5 finally. We could have played 95 perhaps even earlier, but 95 is good now because if white goes bishop c2, then we have ideas of b5 again. And yeah, now there is also a direct threat of knight d3, queen d3, and knight takes e4. White has to take that into account. Otherwise, the idea is to push b5, and again, black has a comfortable position here. b3 can be played, and now white switches to the fianchetto plan since we played g6, and the plans with a5, a4 are not so effective anymore. Okay, we go bishop g7, bishop b2, and castle. Just completing the development, and we are ready to create threats on the next moves. Rook e8 is one of our main ideas, of course. And here we're going to see knight f3 and bishop d3. So white has to be careful here how to proceed, because the king is in the center and there could be tricks on the long diagonal and on the e file and so on. And knight f3 is just a good example of how things can go wrong for white. This is a very natural move. Of course, here we can go rook e8 and pressure on e4, but the more direct knight e4 is even stronger. And this all works because the white king is on e1. Knight takes e4, rook e8. And we're going to take the piece back with a very good position. Will be a pawn up. And even bishop d3 doesn't save the knight because we have f5. And then we take the knight anyway. Bishop d3, white is better off to go for this, and now the e4 pawn is defended. White can finish the development on the next moves. And here we go e6. And we just want to go b5. Okay, not immediately, but the idea is there on a longer term to go b5 before white finishes the development. Knight e2. Again, the knight is better on e2 than on f3 because there is no bishop g4. And knight e5. And now we're ready to push b5. Also, knight e3 can be a threat sometimes. White has to castle to complete the development. Otherwise, of course, our b5 would be even stronger. And we just go for it. We prepared it with the last moves, and here it is. White has to take the pawn on b5, otherwise we just take on c4 and we will create a weakness on c4. So white avoids this. And now, okay, we have the position is good. So in a good position, you usually have several good moves like here, but I think it makes sense to just get rid of the bishop with knight d3, queen d3. Now, of course, we take on b5. And white has to take the pawn. If white doesn't take the pawn, then we could even defend it with c6. Or b4 could be an idea. So knight takes b5 and bishop b7. This is a clever move. Of course, the idea is to attack the e4 pawn. And it contains some traps here. For example, knight bc3. Then there is knight e4, and we take back the pawn with a great position. Now we have the bishop pair. And white cannot take on e4 because of bishop takes b2. And also, if white goes f3, then this pin with bishop a6 is decisive now because um, white weakened g1 a7 diagonal. So, of course, the threat is to go c6. White is trying to stop this with rook fc1, queen d7, a4, and here c6 wins the knight. Why it's very important to include this pawn on f3, you would wonder, because apparently this could have worked also in the other line, but now white doesn't have the resource, the saving resource, queen f3, to attack the knight on f6. So it's all about details. But anyway, I like the idea to weaken white, to force him to push f3, because also the long diagonal is weaker. But in this instance, this little detail that white doesn't have the saving move queen f3 costs him a piece. Let's go back. Now we're going to see b3. This is by far the main move. This is what they used to play when this line was popular. White wants to develop the bishop to b2 quickly and also defend this c4 pawn. And here we need to react quickly. So a5 is the move that I like. And this really justified because white played b3, and now we are simply threatening a4, and it turns out this is very strong threat. It doesn't look so, but after you'll see the line, you'll agree with me. So here we're going to see e4 or bishop b2, bishop b2 being the main move, of course. E4 is an idea to stop d5, but not really, only apparently. And here we just continue our idea with a4. Of course, the threat is to take on b3, and it's very annoying. White has to do something about it. Rook b1. I don't see a better move. And now, of course, it's good to open up the a file. First of all, we take on b3, a takes b3. And here, usually black played g6, followed by bishop g7, and so on. But this novelty, d5, is not only strong, but it's also possible. And now we are acting on white's best defended square, best protected square. And if this move works, it means white's position is critical, is not good. And here e takes d5 is the best. Obviously, knight d5 doesn't work because we can just take on d5, and then there is the strong threat of bishop b4. Also, if c takes d5, which makes sense, but now bishop b4 and knight e4 is there, so this also doesn't work. Let's say white defends with bishop d3, but now knight d4, and black really has a strong initiative here. We could go queen e7, we could go castle. Um, this pin on the c3 knight is very, very annoying. And also white cannot really get to this knight on d4. So the best is to take with the e-pawn. And now we can go queen e7 check, just to disrupt white's normal development. And okay, we're going to see king d1 and bishop e2. If bishop e2, this is very natural. White just wants to go knight f3 castle and enjoy the extra pawn. Of course, in the meantime, taking on c6 is a threat. But here, the most precise is to go knight e4. Just to mention that knight b4 is not so effective because white can go knight f3, bishop f5, and now the exchange sacrifice is good. Bishop b1, knight b1, and now the situation reversed. Black is lagging in development and the queen on e7 is misplaced. So we need to avoid this. Knight e4 is the move. Knight takes e4, queen takes e4. And now there is this double attack on b1, on g2. Okay, g2 not so much, but bishop b4 is the other threat. So queen e3 is the only move not to lose material. Okay, bishop b4 is good here, but we could be more ambitious and fight for an advantage with bishop f5. Queen e4, bishop e4. Now there is this double attack on b1 and also bishop g2 is there. So white is forced to find some only moves. D takes e6 is the one of them. Bishop b1. I think it's good to take the rook. Somehow also b6 works here. This is very strange position. But after b6, we still keep the threats of bishop b1 and bishop g2. And if the rook moves to b2, then there could be also rook a1. So, but bishop b1, why not just take the rook? C takes b7. And now the last important move to remember in this line is to go rook d8. Otherwise, it will be difficult for black. The point of this move is to threaten bishop b4 and not allow white to play bishop d2. And now white needs to spend the tempo on bishop d2 actually, and then we can go bishop e4, going after the b7 pawn, or maybe g2 pawn, but I would rather take the b7 one. Bishop f3, and we can play f5, and then rook b8 and b7 pawn falls. So this is bishop e2. Let's go back. Yeah, here I wanted to briefly mention some other move, knight g2. But this is also quite bad because we have knight b4 and then with bishop f5 coming, and it's not clear. I mean, it's a way of saying white actually cannot stop this. King d1 could be white's solution, but it doesn't really look like a solution because now we will have long-term compensation. However, white is hoping to develop maybe with knight f3, bishop d3, and just bring the rook to e1 quickly and take advantage of our queen on e7, which is now misplaced. Knight b4 we go to save the knight, and of course now the knight is well placed here. There is a threat, quite a strong one, to go bishop f5. White has to stop our idea with bishop d3. And now it's good to retreat the queen, because the queen is, after we gave the check, the queen is just misplaced on e7, and we go back with queen d8. And we want to go bishop e7, castle. We are a pawn down, but white's king in the center will be a long-term asset for us. And of course, it's very difficult to play this position with white, much easier with black, and I like black's chances here. And now let's see bishop b2. White is just continuing his idea, and now he's ready to get a grip, and he has useful moves like maybe rook d1 or e4 next. But we also continue our idea with a4. And we're setting a trap because the pawn cannot be taken, and this was seen in many blitz games, online blitz games, where white was just falling for this. So we're going to see here knight a4 first of all, knight d5, and rook d1. Knight a4, white's favorite move in internet games. They don't want to deal with that a pawn just to get rid of it, but now black is much better. And usually these internet games, they finish quite quickly here in black's favor after d5. And this is the point, because now white's pieces are misplaced. There's knight on a4, queen on d2, and we have plenty of ideas like knight e4, rook a4, or even bishop b4. And yeah, here you can see why it was important to keep this bishop on this diagonal, on a3 fa diagonal. Now, okay, the only move is c takes d5. White's position is critical, and he needs to make some only moves to at least stay in the game. Just to show you the danger of the positions, knight c3 loses a piece to d4, and the knight is attacked, and bishop b4 is there. So c takes d5. And here black has several options. Rook a4, I like this, is a nice move. The idea is to play bishop b4 then with knight e4. But also knight e4 is possible, and queen d5. These are also good moves. Basically showing that black's position is is fine. So even after we sacrifice the pawn, but rook a4, why not? And now again, white needs to find only move to stay in the game. A3 is the move. So it's very important to control the b4 square. Otherwise, white loses on spot. And here, okay, you can see it's a very unusual position already from the early game. We are a piece up for a pawn, but both the rook and the knight are hanging. And here I'm quite happy with this move. It's perhaps once in a lifetime opportunity to play such move, rook b4. So the rook was under attack on a4. We don't save the rook, we just put it on b4. Obviously, the idea is to take on b3 and so on, or but the rook cannot be cannot be taken because then we could take again with bishop b4 and rename the threat of knight e4. And just to show you, it's very interesting position, but it's good for black. And just to show you how the game could continue. So d takes e6, queen d2, king d2, knight e4, and black has the initiative here. Again, the position is really wild. Uh, but I want to mention that perhaps objectively here, um, the best could be knight e4. Although in a practical game, if I reach this position, I would go rook b4 for sure. But let's say knight e4, queen d3, knight c5, queen d1, and now rook e4. Again, some um, interesting maneuver. And the point is that white cannot take on c6 now because of knight d3 check. You can see the rook on e4 is doing a great job. So this was knight a4. White is better off to refrain from taking the pawn. Knight d5 is another way. Of course, it's not recommended to move the piece twice, but at least now d5 is stopped. And white wants to take on f6, double the pawns. We just want to avoid that with bishop e7. And here we're going to see knight f3 and g3. If knight f3, this is a natural move, developing move. We can take white's dark square bishop with a3. But of course, there's nothing wrong with castle and then to keep the ideas to go a3 afterwards. This is also good. But let's see a3 right away. Bishop c3. Um, just to mention that bishop f6 would lead to the same thing. So bishop c3, knight e4. This is how we going to get the bishop. Queen c2, and now we just take the bishop. Queen c3 and castle. G7 was attacked. And here we have useful moves like bishop e6, rook f8, and then bishop f8 and so on. Even if we really want to get rid of this knight on d5, we could consider knight b8 followed by c6. Nothing wrong with that. But first of all, I would just develop the pieces, maybe put the bishop on f8 and then go knight b8 c6. So this is knight f3. g3, white wants to go for this double fianchetto. Now we can castle. And we have a lead in development and we want to open up the position. Next, so bishop g2. And now knight takes d5. We're getting rid of white's strong knight. And afterwards we can go bishop f6 to activate the bishop. C takes d5 and now knight e5. Of course, we put the knight in the center where it has a good position. It's true that here white's position has a long-term strategical potential, but for now it's not easy to develop because if white goes knight f3, we can take, and then if bishop f3, then bishop h3, and we don't allow white to castle short. And otherwise, of course, we have easy moves here with black to put the rook on the open file with rook e8, bishop f6 is there, bishop d7, and so on. And it's not easy for white to finish the development. Also, I want to um, mention this idea that if white goes knight h3, we have this idea to push h5 and h4 to, of course, white will need to castle short, and then after h4, we just weaken white's position. So this is knight d5 and rook d1, reinforcing the center, making room for the bishop to go to a1 if we go a3. Of course, if white moved the rook away from the a file, it makes sense to just open the file. A takes b3, a takes b3. And now in the future, not right now, of course, for now we need to finish development, but in the future there will be ideas of knight d7, knight c5. First of all, we need to finish the development, and it's best to put the bishop on the long diagonal with g6. G3, white is also going for the double fianchetto. Other moves are possible like knight f3 or e3, but we just continue the same way. First of all, to develop the king side. So g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, castle. Finally, we completed the development, and we want to go knight d7, knight c5 to put pressure on the b3 pawn. Also, rook e8 could be a useful move, but perhaps it's better to implement this knight d7, knight c5 idea first. Knight f3, white is also going for development, and now knight c5. And it turns out this idea of knight c5, knight d7 with idea knight c5, it turns out knight c5 is a real threat because white doesn't have queen c2, then there is knight b4, and the b3 pawn is falling. So white has to find a way to stop this, and it's not an easy solution. Okay, here we're going to consider castle, queen c2, knight a4, and knight d5. Castle is the natural move, but it doesn't do anything to address our threat. It's actually a careless move. It's a blunder, so we just go knight c5, and now we're going to take the b3 pawn, and if white goes queen c2, we're going to see this with in the line with queen c2 instead of castle. Okay, let's start with queen c2 first, just because we are talking about this before. And this is also a blunder because white doesn't really defend the b3 pawn. Here we can go knight c5, and again renewing the threat of knight b4. There is another threat of bishop f5. So white castles, and now bishop f5, just to show you why white's position is bad. E4, what else? Knight takes e4, knight takes e4, and here rook a2. And we're going to take the piece back, and like this, we're winning a pawn. So this is why both castle and queen c2 are blunders here. Now let's see the better moves. Well, white has solutions, but they look unnatural. This knight on a4, for example, just to stop us from playing knight c5, and it also closes the a file. Okay, bishop b2, queen b2, and queen f6. We are immediately challenging the long diagonal. Now we want to trade the the queens. And the thing is that without queens, the b3 pawn will be more difficult to defend. Queen takes f6, knight f6, and now knight a5 is already a threat to go after the b3 pawn. The knight on a4 is also misplaced, and black is preferable here. Also, I want to mention that white's king is in the center. So white has some problems to solve. And finally, let's see, knight d5. Trying to trade the bishops. Of course, the knight is better placed on d5 than on a4, but it doesn't. Now the a file is open, and we can go rook a2 with a very annoying pin. Knight c3. This is forced. White has to move the knight back. And here, if we want, we can just repeat the moves and make a draw. But there is also a very interesting exchange sacrifice here with rook takes b2. And game goes on, queen b2 and knight c5. And here we have very nice compensation for the exchange. The g7 bishop is a monster. Also, b3 pawn is weak. And we have very active pieces, and we can activate them even further with bishop f5 and rook e8 and so on. So I like this exchange sacrifice. White is again on the defensive here. So this was knight c3, and now we're going to move on to other moves. D takes e5. With this, white wants to trade the queens. Most likely you'll face this move against a lower rated opponent who is trying to make a draw. But it's not good for white to release the pressure, the tension in the center so easily. D takes e5. Now white's idea is to just take on d8. King takes d8, and in this case, the black king is doing just fine at the center, and we'll be able to play c6, king c7. Also, the pawn on c4 is quite weak, and we're going to gain a tempo on it with bishop e6. Suddenly, this endgame is preferable for black, actually. So here we're going to see knight f3 and knight c3. It makes sense to develop either knight. Knight f3 is an option, but now we can go f6, and the knight on f3 is slightly misplaced. And afterwards, we can continue our plan with bishop e6, c6, king c7, and so on. Let's say knight c3, bishop e6. I like this move because the bishop is ideally placed on e6, and it also comes with tempo. Let's say e3, and now c6, with a great position for black. Knight d7, king c7 are just some more our moves. And in the meantime, white is lacking a clear plan. I think also psychologically is difficult to play this position with white, to not to know what to do, and immediately to be slightly worse from the opening. So now let's see knight c3. White intends some b3, bishop e2, and long castle. But here white is not in time to take advantage of our king on d8. And I like this move, bishop e6. Again, we are attacking the c4 pawn and also putting the bishop on the ideal square. b3 to defend the pawn. knight d7. Well, actually, we could also start with c6. It doesn't matter so much. Let's say knight d7. And what can white do here? Let's say g3. If bishop g7, if bishop b2, it just goes c6 followed by king c7. So let's say g3. And here, basically, black has a good position, and we can even go bishop b4, and the bishop will be active on b4, and it depends. White can go either bishop d2, but bishop d2, we can go a5, and also the same after bishop b2, a5, and black has a comfortable position, no problems from the opening. We will be able to play c6 to stop the bishop on g2. So it's not recommended for white to go for this endgame. e3 is a rare sideline, but it makes sense to reinforce the d4 pawn. White just wants to get some game with knight f3, knight c3, bishop e2, and so on. And at the same time to keep the structure flexible. We can see some space with f5, our typical idea. Now we want to go knight f6, bishop e7, castle, and so on. And here, knight c3, knight f6. Here we're going to see knight f3, bishop e2, and bishop d3. Just to mention that the endgame of the d takes e5, d takes e5, queen d2, queen d8, king d8 is very comfortable for black. We can then go c6 and so on. So no problems for black here. Okay, let's see. Knight c3, very natural development move. White is already attacking the e5 pawn, but it has a downside now because now we can go e4 with tempo. And we do this. Now we're going to see knight g5, knight d2 transposes to third move, knight f3. So here knight g5. Bishop e7, we're just continuing the development. It appears tempting to go here h6, knight h3, and g5, just to restrict this knight on h3. But now white has a typical move, knight g1, and then followed by h4, and then our king side is actually quite weak. So we want to avoid this. We go bishop e7. White is challenging our center with f3. Instead, if knight h3, just c6 will transpose. So f3. And now castle. We are sacrificing a pawn, but we have a better development. And if white takes the pawn, then the f file will open up. Let me remind you, the white king is in the center. And now let's see if white accepts the challenge with f takes e4, or there is also an option to go bishop e2. Bishop e2 is more cautious, and white first wants to castle and then take the pawn. Here, of course, it's not good to take on f3 because it just gives white easy play. This would play into white's hands. But instead, we can go c6, and we have this idea to reinforce the center with d5. And now white has to take on e4, otherwise we just go d5 and um, we'll have a solid center. So f takes e4. And here it's important to remember this in between move, h6, to drive away the knight, and like this we're not losing a pawn. And then we can take on e4. So knight h3. And here it's important to take with the knight, because if white takes, then the f file will open up. And we have this idea to take on c3 to double the pawns. Also, another idea is to go bishop h4, g3, and then bishop g5, and then create a weakness on g3. However, let's see what happens if white just takes on e4. Now we take with the f pawn. Let's say knight g4. Knight c4 is the same thing. We just, so knight g4, now we take on e4. So it's good to trade the knights because we're opening up the f file, and we want to do this. Knight takes e4 and d5. We want to open up the game and take over the initiative while the wild king is in the center. We have enough compensation for the pawn. White's position is also fine, but I think this is easier to play with black because white has to be precise. It's white is on the defensive here. Bishop d3 is another possible setup. White wants to go knight e2 and castle. White setup would work very well after bishop e7 and knight e2, and white gets good position. And because in these positions, if we go e4, then bishop c2, followed by f3 and so on, this works for white. We don't want to allow this, but we have g6 here. This is much better. And we're going to put the bishop on the long diagonal, then follow with castle and so on, with a good position for white, for black, sorry. Playable for both sides, but it's a completely different thing to have the bishop on the long diagonal here. So just remember this detail to go g6 here. Bishop e2 is a flexible move. White is not showing where is going to develop the g1 knight yet. We just go bishop e7, continuing the development. If we play g6 here, white gets a good setup after knight f3. I mean, g6 is still possible, but white could go something like this: knight f3, e4, knight g5. So that's why we develop the bishop to e7. Now, if white goes knight f3, we will play e4. So let's say white goes knight h3, putting the knight on the rim by himself. And well, the drawback is that now we're not going to play e4 anymore. We would be some tempo down, but instead we leave the pawn on e5. So we just castle, castle, and c6 to control the d5 square. And we can play later on knight a6, knight e7, just the normal ideas, but the knight on h3 is misplaced here. So I wouldn't like to have this position with white because of the knight on h3. I don't see much purpose to this, to that. Now let's see d5. This can be a principled move. White is seizing space in the center, but now we get a great version of the King's Indian. And we can continue with a5. Typical King's Indian move. We want to go knight a6 and then to have the c5 square for the knight. So first things first, after d5, just go a5 to secure c5 square. Also, this move a5 is quite rare. And this is to our advantage. It's less studied. Knight c3, let's say, knight a6, just following the plan. I think white has to go e4. This was the point. And now we go g6. The idea is not to fianchetto the bishop, but rather to trade it, and then we leave white with this worse light squared bishop. The knight can go to c5 and so on. And here we're going to see bishop e2 and bishop d3. And bishop e2, well, that's one way to develop the bishop. We can go knight c5 here. The immediate bishop h6 was also possible, but let's say first knight c5. Here, okay, if white goes bishop e3, with ideas to take on c5, we need to go b6 to prevent this. Now, if white takes on c5, we can take with the b pawn. And after b6, we can continue with bishop h6. So knight f3, bishop h6, and we realized our strategical idea to trade these bishops. And here white got quite a passive setup with this bishop on e2 and knight f3. Later on, we can prepare f5 with a nice position for black. It's more natural to go bishop d3, a bit more active also. And we're just following the plan to trade the bishops with bishop h6. White should probably take, otherwise we can take on c1 anyway. So takes on h6, knight h6. Okay, the knight is slightly misplaced. It would come back into play. And here white goes queen d2 before we have time to go f5. Knight g4. The knight is coming into play. And here is more active. If it's attacked, it can fall back to f6. f3, let's say, knight f6. So it took some moves, but we realized our strategical idea here. Knight e2. Now it makes sense to see some space on the king side. Notice that it's good to keep the king in the center, so as not to get under attack. And here black has a comfortable position. Let me just show you a sample line. Let's say long castle, we can go knight d7, king b1, knight b6, and then bishop d7, knight c5, and with a good position. It's important, of course, not to play c6 because in that case we would open up the position for white. And also it's good to keep the king in the center, not to hurry with the castle because we could fall under attack. So just go bishop d7 and knight c5 and black is fine. Let's go back. e4. This move is similar to knight c3 um, because it allows us to take on d4. So we go for it, queen d4, knight c6. We are developing with tempo. As I mentioned before, I like it when whenever black manages to get this, he takes e4, queen d4, knight c6, attacking the queen. Queen d2, again, white is trying to go knight c3, b3, bishop b2, um, or bishop d3, of course. If queen d1, then just g6, knight c3, bishop g7, and it transposes to the line with the third move, knight c3. And here after queen d2, we have this interesting idea to break the center with f5. Like this, we really bring the game into new territory. Uh, we're not allowing white to get a grip, and also from both sides have, let's say, equal development. And the queen on d2 now is not impressive. F5 is interesting and it's good, but of course, if we want, we can just follow up with knight f6 or uh, g6, and these are also good moves, development moves. So this is e4. This looks a bit strange to me. And now let's see the main move, knight f3, immediately putting pressure um, on the e5 pawn. So here, after knight f3, we have to go e4. We accept the challenge and we drive the knight away. Instead, it would have been passive to defend the e5 pawn. And here we're going to see all the possible moves, knight g1, knight d2, and knight g5. Let's see them one by one. Knight fd2, this is a more passive approach. However, the knight is not exposed here. Of course, we defend the e4 pawn with f5, getting some space. Then knight f6 is next. Knight c3, knight f6, e3. So here white is already preparing f3 to challenge the center. And since white has this knight on d2, we can just go c5 here and to fight for the center like this. It was possible to go bishop e7 here, but this allows f3. So that's why c5 is more interesting. Now we're going to see d5, knight b3 and bishop e2. D5 is only helping us because it now we have good control of e5 square, and of course it's good to put the bishop on the long diagonal, and then we're going to bring a knight to e5, and black is already better. So d5 is a big concession. White shouldn't go for it. Knight b3. White has the idea to take on d4 with the knight, but on the other hand, the knight is passive on b3, and also white won't have good plans. It's like this. There is no more option to go b3 or to push on the queen side. Also, it's more difficult to fight for the e4 square since the knight is on b3. So g6. Again, we want to put the bishop on the long diagonal. where it's ideally placed. But first of all, of course, we need to go b6 to secure the c5 pawn, bishop e2, b6. Now, once c5 is well defended, we are ready to go bishop g7. And of course, if we manage to develop our pieces, we get a great position here. White will just get suffocated, so he needs to um, challenge the center immediately to do something. Bishop g7, castle, and now we can play bishop b7. The point is to recapture on e4 with the piece. And if white goes d5 here to shut off our bishop, then this is very bad strategically for white, because um, then we have access to e5 square. So this knight b3 is not leading to a good position for white. Now let's see bishop e2. This is the only move that makes sense. Also very natural. Um, but the other moves like knight b3 and d5 were played more frequently. Yeah. The other moves which were worse. Okay, knight c6. We are putting pressure on d4, and we want to see what white is going to do about it. And here we're going to see b3 and knight b3. B3 makes sense to develop the bishop on b2, and this was played in Peirar against Leon in Austrian League 2024. The game ended in a draw. However, Leon had an easy solution here. In the game, he played g6, but it was possible to take on d4, e takes d4, and now bishop e7. Simply continuing the development. Of course, it's important not to fall for knight d4 here because of knight d4, and then the d4 knight is hanging. Knight b3 is the better move to defend the pawn on d4, and now it makes more sense. Here, we're going to play b6, more flexible approach, but also more ambitious. We still hope to get this g6, bishop g7 on the board, and for that it's good to have the c5 pawn defended. Bishop e7 was seen in most of the games, but why not try to get a more ambitious setup? Castle, and now this is the point, g6. Again, if we manage to finish development, black will have a great position, so white has to do something quickly with f3, opening up the position. Bishop g7, f takes e4, and now just f takes e4. And we're going to castle next move to bring the king to safety. Just to mention here that if white goes 92, we castle nevertheless. And now if white takes on e4, the d4 pawn is going to hang in the end. So e4 pawn is indirectly defended. This was 92. The more passive approach. Knight g1 is there. White loses to tempi, but uh, he forces us to push e4. The plan is to go bishop f4, e3, and try to get a favorable French structure, but we're happy with the outcome of the opening so far. We can go c6 to just prepare d5, knight c3, very logical, and now d5. Actually, in some games it was played f5, but I like d5 here. There's no need to go f5 anymore. And bishop f4, this was White's idea. If White goes e3, then just knight f6. And here we get a French defense advanced variation where we are playing the white pieces. So it has to be good. And instead, if White tries to get a better version of French to get the bishop out and only then go e3, here we can take on c4, immediately changing the pawn structure and not allowing White to implement his strategy. Knight takes e4, White has to take the pawn back, bishop b4, this comes with tempo, knight c3. If bishop d2, there is queen d4, bishop b4, queen e4. White has some compensation, but a pawn is a pawn. We are a pawn up. White is counting on this dark squared bishop, but we're a solid pawn up. Yeah, it's not bad. Knight c3. And now knight f6 with a comfortable position. We have active pieces. The c4 pawn is not in danger because we'll be able to support it with b5. And if White goes e3, we have knight d5, attacking both on c3 and on f4, when White doesn't have bishop d2 to go back with the bishop. So this is the line we're recommending against knight g1. Just go for c6 and d5 quickly. And now let's see the main move, knight g5. This was played in most of the games, immediately attacking the pawn on e4, and also the knight is more active on g5, but it's also exposed. We go f5 to support the e4 pawn and also gain some space. I just want to mention that it's not good here to play knight f6 because of knight c3, queen e7, queen c2, and White is attacking the e4 pawn. There is no good way to defend it, so we need to support it with f5. And here we're going to see g3, knight h3, h4, and knight c3. All these moves, they make sense. They have some idea. g3 is actually the second most played move in this position. But objectively is not a great move. White's idea is to play maybe h4 and then secure the f4 square. So here we can just drive back White's knight, h6, knight h3, and g5. And now this knight is bad on the edge of the board. And the idea with the knight g1 and h4 is not so effective because White has g3 on the board. And here we're going to see knight c3 and knight g1. Knight c3 White is developing, and he will play knight g1 later on. So after this, white has two plans, knight g1 and h4. It's still there, or bishop g2 and f3. But we go bishop g7. The bishop is very useful on g7, very active. And if white goes knight g1, we can go c5. So white goes bishop g2 with the idea to play f3 or even castle. And now c6. This is a new move. Of course, it's very ambitious. We want to go d5 and reinforce the whole center. And if white goes d5, here we can even take on c3, b takes c3, and c5. And white has this double pawns, which are also, especially the c3 pawn is limiting the dark square bishop. And black has a great position here, also from a strategical point of view. Just to mention that knight f6 or knight e6 are also good moves here. You can go for one of these if you prefer them. But c6 is possible, c6 is good, and let's say white goes f3 sooner or later, but actually sooner is better for white to try to challenge the center. We go d5 as planned, castle, and now we need to finish the development with knight f6. We are one move away from castling. And here, yeah, I want to mention that if white takes on e4, it's better to take with the d pawn. And the reason is that we want to keep the f file closed, and white also doesn't have cannot attack the d5 pawn anymore. And also here, if white goes queen b3, trying to put more pressure on d5 and also b7 maybe, so that we don't have bishop e6. The most precise move here is queen b6 to okay, we are also attacking on d4, but we also want to trade the queens. So this was knight c3, and now let's see if white tries to immediately go knight g1 with idea h4. There is a point in white's play, but on the other hand, now we have gained some space. And we can go c5. We're trying to exploit the fact that white spent the last 4 moves moving the knight. And we want to open up the position. Here, if white goes h4, we can just take it. Rook takes h4, then bishop e7. And this comes with tempo. And also, if white takes on c5, I like this move knight c6 and playing for the initiative. And again, this works because all of white's pieces are still on the first rank. So this is g3. Let's see knight h3, trying to reroute the knight to f4. Here we just go c6 to prepare d5. And now after knight c3, it transposes to 5 knight c3. h4. This is a useful move. White is trying to gain some space on the king side. Also, it's stopping h6, g5 ideas. And now we're recommending to grab a pawn. This is possible and tempting. If you don't want to go for the pawn, you can also go c6. It's a good alternative. But let's see what happens when we take the pawn, h6, knight h3, and down queen h4. Of course, there is no other choice now if we played h6 because we weakened the g6 square. Okay, so this is quite risky, but it works. And we are losing a few tempi to take this pawn. White will have some compensation, but still a pawn is a pawn. E3 is a useful move for white. Just to mention that if white goes knight c3 here, we have a nice move, queen h5. You see the knight is still pinned, and the queen can go to f7 later on, which is the ideal square. So e3, and this contains a small trap here because if we're careless, after bishop f6 there is bishop after knight f6 there is bishop e2, and the queen is trapped. White is threatening g3. But we go queen e7. We need to bring the queen back. It takes some time, but the pawn is a pawn again. Knight f4, threatening knight g6, but we can stop it with queen f7. So this is the ideal place for the queen because it's pairing knight g6. Bishop e2, there is another threat, bishop h5, and we just go knight f6 to stop bishop h5. Well, white has better development, and here also the rook on h1 is more active, so white has compensation due to the active pieces, but we managed to stop the threats, and on a long term, I think the pawn is going to count. Let's go back. Knight c3, very natural move. And here we go c6. This is flexible move. We always have this idea to go d5 at the right moment, but in the meantime we're also controlling the important d5 square. Even in some cases, maybe we want to go knight a6, knight c7. And here we're going to see h4, d5, g3, and knight h3. It makes sense to go h4 just to gain some space on the king side. But again, we can hunt down the h4 pawn after h6, knight h3, and queen h4. And the idea is to reroute the queen to f7 somehow. For example, queen h5, queen f7, or queen e7, queen f7. And afterwards, we can develop with knight f6, bishop e7, and so on. Again, white has compensation for the pawn, but we're a pawn up. Let's see something else. d5. This is a rare move. White is trying to see some space and get the e6 square for the knight, but I think it's premature to to do this, and also is giving up the e5 square like this. So here we can hit the knight with bishop e7. And now we have h4 or knight h3. h4 is trying to keep the knight on g5 for now. And again, we can go after the pawn. It's a bit risky, but it works. If you don't want to take the pawn, you can go knight f6 or bishop f6 to activate the bishop. Both these moves are fine. But let's see what happens when we get the pawn. h6, knight h3, and bishop h4. Okay, we wasted some moves to take the pawn, but now we are a pawn up. Knight f4. Here we need to show some precision. White has this threat of knight g6. We're going to play bishop f6, kind of ignoring the threat, but now we want this is the only move, bishop f6. So if you take the pawn, you need to know. But now we have the idea to also take on c3. White goes e3 to jump on h5 with the queen. And now we have this bishop c3. This is a clear-cut solution. B takes c3 and knight f6. I like this knight on f6 very much because it's stopping white from playing queen h5. And given time, of course, we want to block the position with c5, and then this bishop on c1 would be bad. Meanwhile, we would be a healthy pawn up. So, of course, white needs to open up the game since he has the bishop pair. So d takes e6, knight c6, just continuing the development. And we reach the double-edged position. We want to go g5 to disrupt the f4 knight. It's not clear what is going on here, but definitely white should play very actively. So let's say a sample line could be bishop a3, immediately targeting the d6 pawn. We go g5, knight h5. Now the king is a bit loose, but it goes to f7, bishop d6, and queen a5 with a very unclear position. C3 is under attack. I don't really know what's going on here. But I feel like white has to be more precise, because if we have time, for example, to go bishop e6, put some rook to d8, then black is better. So this was h4. Now we're going to see knight h3. White is rerouting the knight to f4. A bishop f6. We take this opportunity to activate the bishop. And again, there are ideas to take on c3 and then go c5 and block the position. D takes c6. White is opening up the game. Just to mention that the careless knight f4 could be met with bishop c3, bc3, and then knight f6. And here black is better. White's bishop is not really strong. Meanwhile, the double pawns they are weak, and they will tell on the long run. And the bishop is not active because of the pawn on c3. Black is better here. So d takes c6, knight takes c6, just developing the knight. Although now pawn on d6 could be weak, also d5 square, but the knight is doing great on c6. Is not d6 is not such a big weakness. It's not easy for white to attack it. Knight d5 and now bishop e5. We are keeping the bishop and it's very active here. Also quite an unusual position um, for the bishop. But now we want to follow up with the knight f6 or knight g7 and challenge white's knight on d5. And the position is already preferable for black because of the lead in development. So this was d5. Now we're going to see g3 with idea again to go bishop g2, f3, or even h4. Typical plans. Yeah, now with g3, h4, the h4 pawn is not hanging, so we don't have those options to grab the pawn. And here we are recommending this rare but very ambitious move h6. The idea is to keep the knight from its active position. Just to mention that in most of the games black play bishop e7 and this is also fine. But why not get a more interesting position after h3, h6, knight h3 and now g5. This is the point to isolate the knight on h3 and take away the f4 square. And this idea with h6, g5 works when white plays g3. Otherwise, for example, the pawn on e3 and the pawn on g2, it is not so good for black. Now knight g1 is the best move. If white goes f3, of course, we go d5 and we have a nice center. Then we can follow up with knight f6 and so on. So knight g1 and bishop g7. Of course, here we need to show some accuracy because otherwise we can just be worse. We have some weaknesses. And with this move bishop g7, we want to avoid let's say h4, g4 idea. After h4, we don't want to go g4 because then we give white easy play with f on the f4 square. And for this, we need to have the h8 rook defended. So let's say h4. And now knight a6, just developing and leaving the bishop open. Knight h3, putting more pressure on the g5 pawn. White can do this. Let's see what happens if white just takes on g5. We take. Rook takes h8, bishop takes h8, knight h3. But here we have bishop f6, and we successfully defend the g5 pawn. This is important. So knight h3, attacking the g5 pawn, and now we want to go queen b6. Also, bishop f6 is interesting here because of the pin on the h file. White cannot yet cannot take on g5. But with this move, we're attacking the pawn on d4 and we're keeping the knight also on b2. e3. Now white can defend the d4 pawn like this, but now the bishop is shut off, and we can just return with the queen to d8 and protect on g5. We want to follow up with knight f6 and so on. And queen h5 check here doesn't lead anywhere. We can go just king e7. Look at this position. And this is this is good for black. Yeah, I just want to mention that instead of this queen d8, there was also knight f6. If you were concerned about the check on h5, so with knight f6, black just stops this check, and white still cannot take on g5 because of the rooks hanging on h1. So this was g3. Now let's see knight h3. White is rerouting the knight to f4. And also in some lines he wants to go bishop g5. And we just finished the development with knight f6. Later on we're preparing d5. It was also possible to play bishop e7 to try and prevent bishop g5. But we may as well allow this plan with bishop g5. It's not such a big deal. And here we're going to see bishop g5 and e3. Bishop g5. This is a principled move. White wants to take the knight at the right moment and then go knight f4, e3, and so on. Just to get rid of the pin, we go bishop e7, knight f4. This is good because now we don't want to play h6 anymore, since g6 would be weakened. Just to mention that sometimes white goes here for f3, but then we just have the same plan to go castle and knight a6, knight c7 with a good position. It's not clear what white is doing. Knight f4, castle. So first of all, we brought our king to safety, and now we want to go knight a6, knight c7. It was, of course, possible to go knight a6 immediately with idea knight c7, but why not castle? e3, connecting the pieces. Now he wants to develop with bishop e2. We go knight a6. And this is an important idea because we want to go knight c7 and knight e6 to trade white's knight on f4. Otherwise, that knight can be annoying there, but this is a strong idea and you need to remember it. Here, of course, we don't want to go h6 because we weaken g6 square, so just go knight a6, bishop e2, finishing the development. White wants to go castle or h4. So here we just continue our plan, knight c7, heading towards e6, castle, knight e6, and suddenly we get a very comfortable position after we manage to trade these knights, but it's important to remember this idea. Afterwards, we can even follow up with d5 to grab more space and so on. And now let's see e3. So white is leaving the dark squared bishop behind the pawns. And he will develop the bishop to b2 with b3, bishop b2 later on. Here we go bishop e7. I think g6 is also possible, but I like bishop e7 more. Knight f4 and knight a6. Um, we're developing the knight. This is the way we are developing the knight. Obviously, we need to keep the light squared bishop open, and we want to go knight e7, then castle, and maybe at the right moment even knight e6 to trade the knights. h4. Um, Typical plan to gain some space on the king side and also secure this knight on f4. For example, if white goes bishop e2 here, it's possible to castle, of course, just normal play, but white should also consider g5. So that's why white was going h4 there. And now we castle. First of all, we uh, bring the king to safety, and then we want to go knight c7, knight e6. And now we have d5, h5, and bishop e2. d5 is, with this move, white is stopping us from pushing d5, but now we have two good squares at our disposal, c5 and e5. And here I like this move knight g4. Right now we are attacking on h4, and we can activate the bishop with bishop f6. And then with idea bishop c3, bishop e5, and so on. So black is doing well here. I don't think white should go d5 so quickly. There is h5, quite a rare move, but this turns out to be the most challenging one, and like this, white is seizing more space. The pawn is well defended on h5. Of course, now if we go king h8, not immediately, but there could be ideas of knight g6. So we're not really going to play king h8 anymore. And here we can go rook f7 just to cover the a2 g8 diagonal. The king will stay on g8. And we want to prepare d5. Bishop d2. This was played in correspondence, so it has to be a good move, at least to have some deep idea. This is aimed against d5. I just want to mention that if white goes bishop e2, we can go d5, and the same is for b3. Again, we can go d5. Actually, after b3, white doesn't have queen b3 anymore, so d5 is really good. So bishop d2, and now knight c7. First of all, we bring this knight to c7, and we want to go either knight e6. We've seen before how important it is to trade white's strongest piece, this knight on f4, but also we are preparing d5. Here, white should probably go d5 to stop both our ideas. And now this is a better version for white because our knight is on c7. It's a bit more passive. It doesn't have access immediately to c5 or e5. Now, of course, the typical reaction is knight g4. We've seen this in the other line. We want to go knight e5, bishop e2, and knight. We managed to get a knight to e5, and the knight there is very strong. It could go here, maybe bishop d7, bishop f6. This is how we can improve our position. Again, all the pieces are on the board. There is plenty of fight. Both sides managed to achieve some strategical aims. White got this knight on f4, managed to get the pawn all the way to h5. Stopped us from playing knight e6 or d5, but on the other hand, we have a nice knight on e5. We have a strong pawn on e4, and the position is uh, complicated with a long struggle ahead. But h5 is quite rarely seen in practice. The most uh, often played move is bishop e2. Of course, it makes a lot of sense to develop the bishop, even in some lines. If white goes d5, then we don't have knight g4 anymore. So here we're recommending d5. Just go for it. This is the right moment. It's possible also to go knight c7, but then again, as I mentioned, white has d5 and we don't have knight g4 anymore. So this is a worse version. But d5 is justified because white already spent a tempo with the bishop e2. So if he's going to take on a6, like we gained a tempo, and we want to go knight c7, of course, then bishop d6, and trade. We can even trade knight on f4 with a great position. So here white has to act quickly. Takes on d5, c takes d5, and we're going to see queen b3 and bishop a6. Queen b3 is attacking, finally attacking the d5 pawn, but now we can move the knight and we go knight c7, just in time to defend the d5 pawn. And okay, white should probably grab this moment and take the pawn. If he delays this with bishop d2 in order to get a better version, now of course it's much stronger. This knight cd5 or also rook c1 can be considered, but now we have bishop d6, rook c1, and we can take on f4. E takes f4, knight is 6 with a good position. The thing is that now our central pawns are secure. So here I want to mention that after bishop d2, bishop d6, it would be a blunder to take knight fd5, because we can just take knight fd5, knight d5, bishop e6, bishop c4, and now b5 wins a piece. The check on e7 or f6 doesn't help because we can take with the queen and our bishop is defended. So going back, knight cd5 is the only way to fight for an advantage. Knight fd5. It is better to capture like this because in the future the knight on c7 could support the b5 push. Bishop c4, this is the whole point, because now we don't have bishop e6 since this knight is on f4. King h8, we're moving away from the pin. And now knight d5. Just want to mention that if white goes bishop d5 instead, then we go bishop d6, bishop c4, and b5, and this is good for black. So knight takes d5, and here we have b5, just opening up the position. White is forced to take on e7 here. If knight c7, then just b takes e4, queen c4, rook b8. And white's pieces are very badly placed. Knight on c7, king on e1, bishop on c1 is still not defended. So white is in trouble here. Knight e7 has to be played, b takes e4, and queen a3. This is the only move. White needs to defend the knight. If instead queen b4, the queen would be exposed on b4. So queen a3, and now bishop b7. We want to take away the c6 square for the knight, and we hope to trap the knight with rook f7, or even queen d7 and rook a8 we want to play. White will be able to save the knight, but he will have to do play something like d5, knight c6, and so on, if necessary, or d5, d6 to try something like this. But anyway, black has a great position. So going back, bishop takes a6. White can take the knight. White wants to take this knight because otherwise the knight goes to c7, defending the d5 pawn. But here, white lost the tempo with bishop e2, bishop a6. B takes a6, and queen b3, attacking the pawn. And here it's good to play rook f7 just to address this diagonal, to improve the so that the king will not be exposed after white takes on d5. And we need to go for this because we cannot defend the d5 pawn. But afterwards we're going to get good compensation on the light squares. So let's say knight c d5 and then bishop d6. We are saving the bishop, and light squared bishop will be strong. At the same time, we want rook b8 to activate the rook, also with tempo. And black has good compensation here because it will be difficult for white to castle. Since the pawn is on h4, it's a weakness there. And here we have long-term compensation on the light squares. Okay, so this was the English with the rat defense with d4, d6, c4, e5. Let's just go for a quick recap. So d4, d6, c4, e5. Of course, we go for e5 if white allows us to do it. And now, okay, white has many options. Let me remind you that knight c3 is not so dangerous. Actually, there are some very beautiful lines in this. We just take on d4, queen d4, knight c6. Queen d2 is the main move, and now knight f6, this flexible move. And we just wait to see what white does next. If g3, there is bishop e6. If e4, there is g6. And finally, b3, the most played move. We just have this idea, a5, bishop b2, a4. And I think black gets a great position here. So also, I need to mention here d5. Sometimes white goes for this, but I like this idea with a5, knight c3, knight a6, e4, and now g6 to trade the dark squared bishop, and then we can play knight c5 and so on. Um, and finally, of course, knight f3. It's probably the most challenging move. We go e4, and I think the main line is knight g5, f5, and white has all kinds of attempts. Whenever white goes g3, these ideas with h6 and g5 are possible. Of course, it's also a bit more risky. But if white goes e3, then of course it's not possible. Let's say, yeah, then we have this pawn. We can take the pawn sometimes if white goes h4. Um, Grabbing the pawn is dangerous but possible. And if knight c3, just c6, and black is fine in this kind of positions, but um, you also need to know a little bit. The plans are quite straightforward to go knight a6, knight c7, then on the king side knight f6, bishop e7, and castle, and at the right moment to go d5 or even knight e6 to trade white's knight on f4. Thank you for watching.